people who are experiencing homelessness. Therefore, we invited Maria, who is a fianza policy officer focusing on housing rights and coordinator of the Housing Right Watch. Thank you so much for being here with us. And we also invited Louise and James from Focus Island. Louise is a campaign coordinator and James is a lived experience ambassador. They are currently working on a voting rights campaign, and they are going to share with us their knowledge about it, how it's going, and how also you could do it in your country. So thank you so much for being here. Before starting with the presentations, I would like to invite you to participate in this Mentimeter exercise. We would like to know what's your knowledge around this topic and what do you think are the main obstacles in the access of voting for people experiencing homelessness. So I would like to invite you to go on mentimeter.com or to scan the QR code that you can see on the screen and entering the code that you can see up here, which is 41109962. And try to answer to the question with a word or two. I'm already seeing some answers coming up. So what do you think are the main obstacles to access voting rights for people who experience homelessness? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of answers already coming up. The most voted ones is lack of address, lack of ID. And then there are also different answers around administrative obstacles, faith in democracy, social exclusion, citizenship, lack of information, awareness, knowledge. So I think all these are really interesting answers, and thank you for participating in this small game. And so after this answer, I will pass the floor to Maria. She will give us an overview on this topic and also to see if what you think are the obstacles is what we are seeing in all the countries or not. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sylvia. Can you all hear me? Thank you. So I think I'm gonna, well, thank you everyone for this exercise. I think you got most of the main obstacles right. I will be able to go through some of them in my presentation. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this. I am, as Sylvia said, policy officer at Fianza, and my main focus is, or the main focus of my work right now is the human right to adequate housing. You might have seen our campaign on the Homeless Bill of Rights, in which the right to a postal address and the right to vote are contained. But as I say, my work is more focused on economic and social rights than on civic and political rights, but I am really happy that we are addressing this issue in 1 month ahead of the European elections. So I think talking about the relevance of the issue, we as Fianza, or Fianza and its members, we want to ensure the participation of those affected is there, and they have to participate in the design of these strategies and policies to tackle homelessness, because it's both key to the legitimacy and also to the effectiveness of these strategies. And I want to highlight the work of Fianza and its members in promoting participation and advocating for inclusive policies. Some of the information contained in my presentation comes from a recent survey that we did among our members. It's not that I hear from Brussels, from Europe, I'm talking about voting rights, but I'm actually trying to gather the knowledge and the information that we have from our members throughout Europe. Okay, next slide, please. So first of all, it's really important to mention that the right to vote, it's a fundamental right, and it is guaranteed in international treaties and international covenant of civil and political rights, but also in the Protocol 1 to the European Convention of Human Rights. And it's obviously recognized also in EU legislation in Article 39 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. And being a fundamental right, we need to assess whether homeless people can exercise these fundamental rights and try to identify what are the legal and administrative barriers and others that exist, and try to find ways to overcome them. So this is a bit the reason of also this webinar, to be able to assess whether the exercise of this human right is compromised and what kind of obstacles there are, so that we can overcome them. Next slide, please. And one of the first things that I would like to emphasize is the problem of social exclusion, and how voting may not be a priority for people experiencing homelessness, when people have basic needs like shelter, food, they all take precedence, and engaging in the electoral process may seem irrelevant for some of them. However, we believe that voting is crucial because it can help break the cycle of exclusion, and it can empower homeless individuals to influence policies affecting their lives. Okay. I think this is key, that our members or associations on the ground will try to make the connection with those who are excluded and invisible from society, and try to encourage them to participate in the elections. I'll talk about this a bit more on how to overcome this huge obstacle. Next slide, please. Okay, so here comes like one of the main. I mentioned the survey that we did in Fianza some months ago, and registration with the municipality is still one of the main obstacles for voting. This requirement for a permanent address excludes de facto many homeless individuals. And I want to highlight this, like if people cannot register at municipal level, they won't be able to access voting in a majority of cases. The obligation to register with the municipality is already a prerequisite for access to rights such as social benefits, but in the same way, a permanent address is required for voter registration in most countries. So that's not a surprise or something new. And this can be seen as a violation of the principle of the right to universal suffrage. Of course, there are alternative modalities in many countries. The fictitious address, the reference address in Belgium, for example, where we are, but they're not always available, or they have requirements that are strict and then cannot be. So registration proof of address still is one of the main obstacles for voting rights in general. Okay, and I cannot stress this too much. It's really something that it has been going on for many years. Sometimes legislations say they can register even if they don't have like a home address in social services, in shelters, in sometimes in places like a corner of a street. But the fact is that in reality, in practice, this is not always working. Okay, so let's move to the next slide, please. So having mentioned the registration, which is probably one of the main obstacles, other obstacles that are repeated in this survey that I mentioned is lack of access to information on voter registration and voting procedures. So homeless people really face several challenges, including these. Restrictions on voter registration, including early deadlines, can also be a barrier to voting. We'll see later how improved awareness of the requirements and deadlines for voting can reduce barriers to voting for them. And campaigns such as the one that our Irish colleagues are presenting after me are doing exactly this, try to remove these obstacles. In addition, you've already mentioned it in the Miente, the lack of an updated identity document. This is something that our members have mentioned in the survey. It is essential for voting, and some people experiencing homelessness may not have a renewed or updated ID. Maybe they have lost it at some point of their lives because they did not have a home, or maybe they lost their documents and obtaining them can take time, or it can be difficult, particularly for a person with a migrant origin or refugees who may have lost contact with the country of origin. So this is also one main obstacle that we see. Also, other practical challenges that homeless people face have to do with transportation to the polling station, or digital inclusion is been mentioned also from our members. If they need to register for voting, or they have to vote online, for example. Okay, this doesn't really cover all the different situations, but it gives you a bit of an idea of what the issues are. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, in these slides, I want to talk about the specific case of EU mobile citizens, because they face additional barriers to those who we have mentioned in the previous slide. And because they face additional barriers, there's a need for greater support and information for these individuals. And in this, in relation to this, I would like to highlight how FIANZA has done legal efforts to guarantee that the proof of address is not a requirement for voting for EU citizens. And we have been working in the process of the recast directives on elections to try to delete, and it has been successful in some of the cases, to delete this proof of address as a requirement for voting. Next slide. Okay. Yes, you're okay. So one of the other things that we asked our members in the survey was to provide examples of successful initiatives for promoting voting rights for homeless people. And these here in the slides, I have highlighted a few of them. I've tried to be more or less comprehensive, but it's difficult to summarize in just one slide what we heard from them. So people would mention the reduction of bureaucracy in accessing voting, the procedure of voting, standing registration periods, the existence of outreach programs tailored to homeless communities. And I'm going to highlight examples from Germany and Italy mainly, because I my colleagues will talk a bit about what's been happening right now in Ireland by Focus Ireland. And we see some promising initiatives. They have to do with awareness raising campaigns in many cases. In Germany, for example, in Berlin and Bremen, they used leaflets and posters to publicize voting procedures and deadlines for local elections. There was a lot of collaboration with housing associations. So the authorities cooperated with main housing associations, conducting meetings at centers at emergency accommodation centers or supported housing to explain voting rights and procedures. And in doing this, it's very important that the staff is trained to actually approach homeless people about the elections. So most staff in election offices are now trained to assist and inform homeless individuals about their voting rights. In Italy, we see a few different ideas or activities, which are legal and administrative appeals. So, for example, appeals to mayors and courts to allow homeless people to register as residents and vote. There are also voter engagement initiatives, like encouraging electoral participation and guiding on how to retrieve lost voter cards. There's been also information and education campaigns, so where they have been distributing voting informations, posters, and organizing discussion groups, and even world cafes with accommodation services. But of course, as I said, the IRIS campaign will be presented after I finish my presentation. So you will hear a bit more about something more concrete immediately. And my last slide, please, is about what kind of recommendations we think we can make after looking at the suggestions and recommendation of our own members in Fianza. And they have to do with the three different topics. One is about outreach and relationship restoration. One is about awareness raising campaigns. And another one, which is a very important one, is legislative changes. So in relation to outreach, what we have learned is that to engage marginalized and homeless populations in the democratic process, we really need to rebuild trust and relationships. Organizations working in the field, such as Focus Ireland, that we'll speak immediately afterwards, can achieve these through outreach activities to inform homeless people about elections and help them register. These efforts should be preceded by staff training on how to approach individuals about elections. In addition, organizing debates involving authorities and candidates, as well as facilitating registration through mobile outreach and election day support, which can increase participation. In relation to awareness raising campaigns, these kind of campaigns should be aimed both at the general public to promote the idea that democracy is not achieved until everyone has access to vote. And it has to also be addressed to homeless people, of course, to enable them to participate in elections and discuss the importance of voting and how it can help change public policy and affect their lives. And finally, legislative changes. Electoral authorities across Europe should review and reform voter registration requirements to remove barriers for homeless people, such as allowing alternative forms of address verification and facilitating voter registration in shelters and service centers. And this is what I had to do. I had to say, sorry. For me, it's important to mention that this is just setting the scene of what's happening in Europe. And there's probably a lot more to be said. So I think my colleagues that will speak immediately after me will probably be more concrete on things that are happening on the ground. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them later on. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Maria, for this really interesting overview. And I'm glad to see that our audience got most of the obstacle right in the Mentimeter. So I will pass the floor now to Louise. So please tell us what you're been working on with your campaign and what's going on in Ireland. I'm sorry, if you have any questions, additional questions, we will have a Q&A after, so you can write them in the chat, or after Focus Ireland presentation, you can raise your hand. Louise, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sylvia. I'm just going to, can you all see my slides? Brilliant.
Yes.
Okay, so thanks very much for that. And thanks, Maria, for the overview of what's happening around Europe. And I'm really delighted to say that in Ireland, we have had legislative change. There wasn't an awareness campaign and there wasn't outreach, but because of that, Focus Ireland decided we've got the legislative change, let's go ahead and do that outreach work and the awareness campaign ourselves. Why is my slides not moving? Sorry, I'm just trying to move my slides. Next. Yeah, it should be. Oh, yeah. No, it's gone too far. Sorry, just having difficulties. Oh, yeah.
I think that's all.
Yeah. So I think Maria said a lot of what I was going to say about the importance of including everybody when we talk about democracy. So the engagement of people experiencing homelessness in exercising the right to vote, it's critically important for the health and inclusivity of our democracy. Homeless people bear the brunt of systemic inequalities and are often sidelined in political discourse. And unless we kind of use their unique insights and the failings and gaps within our social safety nets and public policies, we can't make the changes that are needed. So their participation in elections, it's not just a matter of exercising a democratic right, but it's a part of a powerful means of advocating to change society for their well-being, but it's also for the good of all of our society. And voting enables those experiencing homelessness to influence decisions on issues such as affordable housing, healthcare, social welfare services, and all of these areas where their voices are desperately needed, because looking from a bureaucratic point of view, we don't always see the gaps in policies, but somebody experiencing it firsthand are able to see that. And that's why including their voices is so important. So based on that, we had the legislative change, as Maria was talking about, the three things that were needed. We had the legislative change. And so because of that, we decided we would utilize that changes and we would launch a voter registration campaign in March. So we held the voter registration campaign drive, but we did in March, but we did a lot of groundwork beforehand. We engaged with the other organizations within the sector, so other homeless organizations. We engaged with our lived experience ambassadors, got what their insights would be, and we did our own training ourselves around the importance of democracy and voting, and then we trained staff in other organizations. We launched in March, as I said, and James, who's here with me now, was one of our key speakers at the launch. We held the launch in our General Post office in O'Connell Street, which is a very symbolic building for us because it's where the 1916 Rising started. So it was really symbolic for us that it was a new revolution as such, that we were getting people to vote that hadn't previously. The campaign was supported by our newly established Electoral Commission and our National Postal Service An Post. And that was really crucial. The National Postal Service An Post were really crucial in getting this over the line. We developed a training program for our staff and volunteers, and we trained staff in 3 other homeless charities. And this isn't just, so our voter registration for the next election ended, the voter registration closed on the 20th of May, so just last Monday, but this isn't something that we've done it and it'll be over. This is a new cultural change within Focus Ireland, and we're committed to include discussions on voter registrations, the importance of democracy in all key working sessions with our clients going forward. So this is now part of one of our values. So why did we run a voter registration campaign? As I said, a lot of it was to do with the change in the legislation, and we thought this was really important that we utilize this positive change in our legislation. But also empowerment is a key value of Focus Ireland. We don't want to just support clients, we want to empower them. So that is a value of ours. We also believe that to ensure political prioritisation of homelessness, people need to vote for politicians who commit to end homelessness. We need to create a voter bloc. And political empowerment of groups that are most reliant on public services can be a key driver in having the systems and services designed to meet their needs, not what we believe is their needs. And also, you know, homelessness in the last decade in Ireland has grown exponentially. So it needs to be more political now that it is impacting so many different people, and so many people are at risk, and it's so much more visible than it was a decade. And I'll go on to that later in this, with the presentation. I'll just show exactly how much it's grown. So as I said, the Electoral Reform Act 2022, it simplified the registration process and allowed people without an address to vote. Again, I'll go into more detail in that later. And then I'm going to explain the role of An Post's address point service, because that was so crucial to us to be able to use the legislation to offer a very tangible way of creating this service. So I'm going to go through these three things in more detail now. So the growth in homelessness in 2014 to 2024. So you can see we had about 3,500 people in 2014, and it's gone up to 13,860, you know, so it's gone up so much in the last decade. And I'll talk about that dip that you see, because you can see it going up all the way exponentially. Each month goes literally goes up every month, and it's on a straight line, but I will explain about that. This is the growth in adult homelessness. Again, it was under 3,000 and it's now just under 10,000 in that decade. And again, you see it almost like a straight line growth increase, which is really worrying. And then child homelessness. This is really where we've seen huge increase in homelessness in Ireland. So we had less than 1,000. We had about 700 children in 2014, and now a decade later we've over 4,000 children. Now, just again, as you can see, it's almost a straight line up, except for that big gap, the little canyon in the middle that's been there in all of those slides. And that canyon in the middle, I'm not sure is that the right word to use, but that dip anyway, is due to measures that were taken during COVID. So I suppose the measures during COVID included things like ensuring local authorities and homeless organisations really worked really hard together to protect people and move them out of emergency accommodation into their own door places. And that was possible because the tourist industry obviously collapsed and Airbnbs and apartments came available. So we were able to use those Airbnbs and move people on. And then the third thing that would have impacted that would have been there was a ban on no-fault evictions during that time period. So again, that stopped new presentations coming. So between all of those, we saw a big gap in family homelessness, all homelessness during COVID. But as soon as the restrictions lifted and life went back to normal, the growth continued to grow. So it's a massive problem over here, and it's going one direction. And we believe political engagement is the way to change this. So what did the Electoral Reform Act 22 do for us? Well, there are a couple of things. One of the things that Maria mentioned was the bureaucracy about how long you have to register and what way you register. So they moved from, we used to have a very complicated way. You had to get the form in your door. Then if you missed the form, you had to go on a supplementary register, and you had to do that by a certain date. You would have to go to the police station and get your ID witnessed, and it was very complex. And to be honest, if you missed that form, you just basically gave up your voting right. Now we've moved to a rolling registration, which means people can update their details any time of the year, be included in any election, and the only restriction is they need to do it 15 days before an election, not before the election's called, but before an election, and that excludes Sundays and public holidays. So our next election is June 7th, where we will be having the local and European elections, and the registration closed on May 20th. And to be fair to the government and to the Electoral Commission, they very much advertised that, and everybody knew the closing date was May 20th. So that was really good to see that happening. The other thing was the use of personal public service number to enable simple identity data cross-check. So there was legislative change. So everybody in the country is issued with a personal public service number. And that data is held very securely, but there was legislative change that allowed your PPSN number to be used to help identify you for the when you go on the electoral roll. And that meant you didn't need to have your ID, you didn't need to have proof of address, you didn't need to have anything. Your identifier was your PPSN number. So once you were willing to give your PPSN number, you were able to register. And then for the first time, we had online registration to be included in the electoral register. So they were the main three things. But in addition, there were other provisions that have been included. And one was to enable anonymous registration for those whose safety might be at risk if their details were published on the register. And this was particularly important for people in domestic abuse situations, domestic abuse survivors, where they may forfeit the right to vote because they didn't want to be seen on the register and their address to be covered. So that was a really key change as well. It facilitates electors who have no address at the time of registering, which is absolutely so important to us in Focus Ireland. And then another thing that it hasn't really been advertised, but I think it's really important, is it enables pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds who will then be automatically added when they turn 18. And the reason I think this is so important, because some families do not have a culture of voting and they may not encourage their 18-year-olds to vote or to register to vote. But I think having that inclusion at 16 and 17-year-olds, it means that schools can do that in the political classes or the social classes, and they can register children ready to go online when they turn 18. So I think that's really a key to cultural change where families aren't used to registering. And the simplicity of it is what really caused us to say we can do these voter registration drives. To register online, and we went out with our laptops to different sites. We held public ones, and then we also did it in our key working sessions. But all people needed to register online was a valid email address, a PPSN number, which everybody has, and an ER code, which is the unique postcode and address. So if somebody came into us, and very few did, but if somebody came into us without a valid email address, we just set one up there and then for them. Everybody had their PPSN number, they weren't in emergency accommodation without it, and then the ER code, which was key to where Post came in first. So address point service is a practical, simple service which Post, our National Post Office, runs for us. And it generates a personal address based on the person's choice of a local post office, and they're able to collect their post there free of charge. And it gives people back a dignity. So if you're in emergency accommodation, nobody wants to be applying for jobs or are there with an address of an emergency shelter. So this way they can generate an address where they can collect their post, and for the average person looking at it, there's no way of identifying it that this is an emergency shelter or that they're living in homelessness. The addresses are generated instantly. So they're instantly available, and they provide an ER code and an address which can be used then to register people online. So what we did was we immediately went onto Address Point, generated the address and the ER code, and then used that to register people online. And we did see that this was really important for us, registering people online, but also more importantly, in the long term, it meant people had a secure place to collect their post for other things. So there's a lot of migrant people who are homeless in Ireland who may not want their family to know that they're in an emergency hostel in Ireland, but they're now able to have an address and get their post securely delivered. And if a person moves and they change area, again, they can generate a new address, and there's no limit to the amount of addresses a person can generate and have access to their post. So that really was crucial for us using the legislation and using the address point service. And nobody had put those two together, but we decided we can put these two together and really have a seamless transition and how we can register people there and then within. It took us no longer than 10 minutes to register anybody. So, as I said, the campaign was launched in March in the GPO in Dublin, and my colleague James here beside me was one of the key speakers at that. We got nationwide media coverage, which was absolutely brilliant. I mean, we got coverage from early in the morning from our national radio stations to every TV station throughout the day featured it on their news bulletins. So it was brilliant to create this awareness that we were encouraging people who were homeless to vote, and we were offering public registration drives. The registration drive, as I said earlier, continued right up until May 20th. We've closed it now until the elections on June 7th, but we will be continuing this process of enrolling people as we come across them. And we were delighted to see that although we put this campaign together, that the other homeless charities in Ireland really ran with it as well. They worked with us collaboratively, and they ran their own voter registration drives, which was brilliant to see the collaboration between the sector in Ireland. And we offered people 2 opportunities to register. We gave the voter registration and set locations available to the public. So there was, on each day, there was a place that somebody could go local to them to get access to register. And then in the people we worked with in key working sessions, all our staff were trained to say to them, much as they'd say, have you registered a child in a creche? Have you registered with a GP? Have you done this? In that work, they are now asking, have you registered to vote? Oh, you haven't, let's register you now. So it's part of our ongoing education of including democracy as part of our ongoing work. And then what we decided was there was no point registering people and not giving them that additional support services. So after registration, we have a voluntary sign-up option so people can receive a text message on the day of an election to remind them to vote. Because if people are living a chaotic life, they may not remember, so we will be sending them that text. And our education services, so we have an education service called Preparation for Education, Training and Employment. They're providing weekly apolitical discussion groups to explain our political system so that people can be in a very informal way, learn about how how we vote, why we vote, and just about our democracy in real life terms. In Ireland, we use the PRS TV process, which is a very representational way of voting, and it means that everybody's vote really does count. Even if your favored candidate has been knocked out, your vote can really still help get a candidate you like selected. So and I will go through that in more detail in a moment too. And then what was really important was we're going to continue to run election campaigns that will empower people with the tools to question candidates and make informed decisions to align their voting preferences with their values. And to that end, we have been running a local elections campaign providing details on what people should be asking candidates. And I'll go through that in more detail in a moment as well. So Ireland, as I said, uses the proportional representation by single transferable vote. So what people do is when they go into the polling booth, they may have the list of candidates that could run to 27 candidates. They don't mark X about their favorite candidate. They mark 1 for the top one, 2 for number 2, 3, 4, 5, and as far down as they want. They can vote for 27 people if they want to, or they can vote for their top 5. And every electoral cycle, there's this perennial debate that goes on within political circles. Should you use all your votes, or should you stop at the ones that you actually want to be elected? But it is a great system so in the first past the post system, as you know, once your candidate is knocked out, your vote is gone. Whereas you mightn't get your first preference in, but your second preference might get in, or your third preference, and you're going along. And it does mean that so the process of counting votes aims to fill all available seats with candidates who reach a certain threshold of votes known as the quota. So it's very complicated. It's much longer than a first past the post system, because you'll have count 1, count 2, count 3. The voting can go on for days, but it's really exciting. Well, for nerds like me, it's really exciting, but it can be really good so what we found in Ireland is that some parties are not they're not transferable. They're not transfer friendly, should I say. So for instance, one political party, which I won't name, they would get a lot of high preference, and at the start of the vote counting, you think, oh, their candidate's going to walk in, but they don't get any transfers, and the candidate may not necessarily get in. And in that way, I suppose what we would see is that it means that there is moderate voting. So you don't have extremes, because extreme votes won't be transfer friendly. And it has acted as a service to keep Ireland's political system quite moderate. We don't have those extremes. Now, the other side of that, on the downside of it, I don't think we've ever had a one-party government in a very, very long time, not as long as I remember. It's usually coalitions. No one party will get it. And that is the PRS TV system does that in a way that the party will get the amount of seats of the votes that it's much more representational. So it's not, you might have only got 10 votes on each candidate, but you could win every single seat. Within this, even if you know, your seat allocation will be very much aligned to the amount of votes you got. So it's very fair that way, but it is complicated. So the key features is to make the number of seats won by a party proportionate to the number of votes that received. And that's where we keep the moderation there. Voters have more control over who gets elected, as they can rank their candidates rather than just selecting one. And there's a reduced wastage of votes. Thanks to the transfer of votes, fewer votes are wasted compared to the winner takes all. So because of that system, and you know that you are actually seeing candidates you want to get in, rather than your vote feeling, well, my candidate didn't win, what's the point of me voting? You actually can feel control of, okay, my first candidate didn't get in, but the one I liked third did get in. So you feel that more empowered through that PRS TV system. And that's what we thought would help people in voting. So the other thing we thought was we need to support voter knowledge, and we did that through, for instance, in the upcoming local elections, we created 4 policy asks that we believe are within the remit of the local authorities and, if implemented, would lead to reduction in homelessness. So we spent a lot of time working on what those policy asks would be. Then we created a tool on our website where voters can use an interactive map to choose their area, and then click and they send an adaptable email template to all the candidates in their area and ask whether they support policies to end homelessness through these 4 asks. And in that way, they're personally engaging with candidates. They can see their responses. So we're not directing them to which candidate they should vote for, but we're giving them the tool through this web page where they can email all the candidates and get interaction. And we're already seeing responses coming in, and people then can, once they've engaged with their local candidates, they can ask them other issues that they're interested in. So we're giving them direct access to candidates. And the 4 asks from our candidates, not that any of you may care that much, but we thought, build more social housing, ensure that the social housing units being built align with the needs of the people on the social housing. We want a fairer allocation of social housing to those in emergency accommodation. And then a very key ask is an adoption of a best interest of the child approach by local authorities when families first present as homeless. As I said at the start of this presentation, child homelessness has grown so much. And when the legislation governing how local authorities react to family homelessness or to homelessness in general, there were no children in homeless accommodation. Now we have over 4,000. But children are very much invisible in the legislation governing how local authorities, the responsibility local authorities have to people when they present as homelessness. So what we're saying is we are working on a campaign to get that invisibility gone and to ensure children are represented in legislation and ensure their best interests are represented. But in the meantime, we're asking on councillors to ensure that local authorities adopt this even before legislation. And then we've also created a page for candidates to read detailed information about our asks. So we're not expecting the general public to go through all the evidence based on why these asks are important, but we have got it on our website, and we have a second page on our website so we've 1 page for voters and 1 page for candidates, and candidates can read why we are asking for these asks and what we think would make a difference. And we're asking them, if they agree with those asks, that they have a social media badge that they can say, we support the Focus Ireland campaign to end homelessness. So that that'll be very easily identifiable for candidates or for voters who want to vote for people who are prioritizing homelessness. Politicians can identify themselves. And then we're not leaving at that, but we're then compiling a list of candidates who've pledged their support of our asks, and post-election we'll be cross-checking with the elected candidates and we'll be holding them to account on their pledges. So we will follow right the way through to make sure if somebody said they would do something, you said it, you got our vote on that, we want to see action. And I suppose my final observations about this campaign, there's a few things I really, really like about it. One, it's the importance for the actual individual. It's so important. And I've been there at some voter registration drives, and one of them was with young homeless people. And I really thought they would have no interest in it whatsoever. And they actually surprised me at their reaction. They felt so empowered by it. And some of their language was colourful, so I won't use it here, but it basically was, I'll be able to tell those politicians what I think of what they're doing to us. And there was a lovely young Romanian lad, and he said, I know exactly who I'm voting for. And I said, oh, really? Because I was quite surprised. And he said, yeah, whoever's going to do the most for us young people. And I thought, you know, he was engaging in the process. So I think it's brilliant for the individuals themselves, and we all work with individuals. The second reason is important for creating a powerful voting bloc and really pushing it as a political agenda, up the political agenda. And then finally, and Marie really touched on this, valuing democracy means we've a moral duty to ensure those who are most marginalized are supported to have full participation in democracy and vote and the voting process. And that will empower all of us to create the type of society we want. And again, as I said, as Maria has said as well, any questions I'm happy to answer at the end. But for the moment, I'm going to pass on to my esteemed colleague, James, who will be voting for the very first time, because there hasn't been elections since he's turned 18, and he'll explain his part in this.
So hey, I'm James Flanagan. I was homeless as a child at 3 years of age up to 6. I finally got a house in Focus, Ireland, and I was living there ever since. And now I've only recently just got my forever home to where I can build my career further than I have as I did with Focus Ireland. So I find the means to vote and the ability to vote as a homeless person or as a younger person that we need it, and we need to understand that younger people need to vote more, because their insight in the world is totally different to the older generation, because they've just came into society. They're only understanding what's going on in society. Most of them don't understand homelessness. A lot of younger people, especially as me as a younger child, I didn't understand what homelessness was, even though I was homeless. I didn't know where I was. I was just moving from place to place, in and out of hostels, sleeping rough on the streets, in and out of cars. And I didn't understand the aspect of where I was until I finally got a foundation from Focus Ireland. And I built my career from there. I left school at 15 and then became an electrical engineer and built my career further. And I'm trying to now, as an ambassador for Focus Ireland, to get younger people more, not just to vote, but to understand their power and ability to change society today. Because knowing that where I came from and seeing the younger people, they've changed so much from when I seen them in the rough areas and the poverty that they were living in. Now they're building societies, they're in electrical and construction, they're making stuff they never thought they'd believe or think they'd make. And it's wonderful to see, but understanding that voting we need more of, we need to understand that younger people don't have they don't have the access, even though they do. Like, they have the access in their hands, they don't know how to use it. So I'm trying to get more younger people to understand the fact that you have the right to vote and the power to vote, and your voice matters.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for this presentation, both Louise and James. James is also one of our expert by experience that's helping us in EPOCH Practice. So now we would like to invite you to write a question in the chat, or even better, to raise your hand and ask directly a question to our speakers. Mikko, please.
Oh, hello, thank you. A lot of really interesting points of view, and I know we are not right now discussing the reasons of the rise of the homelessness in Ireland, but if possible, very briefly, if you could explain the background of why the numbers are gotten so high in such a short period of time. And another kind of a question or comment is the single transferable vote system. As far as I know, it's really democratic and really good system, as it was already mentioned. But is there any estimation, has it affected the amount of the voters or the turnout of the voters? Is it popular among the people, or is it kind of considered too complicated? Thank you.
Thanks very much. So to come back to the question of why homelessness has grown so much, I think it really goes down to the post-crash in 2008 in Ireland. So we were making real headways into ending homelessness. But in post-crash, we stopped social house building from about 2012 to about 2019. There was no social housing units being built, and that just ended up, and not only no social housing units being built, but also there was no private sector being built. Our building construction industry basically just crashed. And at one stage, which is quite ironic now, back in 2009, we had too much housing, and we had a whole, we called them ghost estates at the time, where there were houses had been built, not in areas that people wanted to live, but houses that had been built and just, there were too many of them and just left empty and left lying to rot. We then had the post-crash where the Troika was in, we were restricted on what we could spend on build. And then just because of all of this and no social housing being built, we used the private rental sector to bolster up, I suppose, social housing units. We pushed people into the private rental sector, which pushed rents up, and for people who were trying to rent normally, the whole rental sector just went crazy. And the landlords are exiting the private rental sector because of all the registrations. But basically, to summarize it, the question in the last decade has been a lack of social housing, a lack of supply for 10 years, and we're seeing the outcome now. And then back to your question, Miko, I think it's really important when we think about the PRSTV, people do feel empowered, and people have seen where quite, smaller independent candidates have gotten through the PRSTV system. And then because there isn't one political party that runs past the post, they contain a lot of political power. And so, for instance, now this is back decades ago, but Tony Gregory was an independent candidate in the general elections back in the late 80s, early 90s. And Fianna Fáil needed his vote. They got the governing power. They needed his one vote to help form the government. And he achieved so much with his one vote in the Dáil to support the government. He got so many promises and whatever, and to that day that still goes on, where one candidate can hold a lot of power, a balance of power within the government, and they can get a lot for their sector people. So we do kind of have that real connection with knowing that my vote will make a difference. It is a complex system, but not really for the voter. The voter literally just has to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But in the election system, then post-election, it takes days to get the final answer, and it can be, quite fun. But I think people do value their vote because of that. But has it impacted on our turnout? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Our last local elections, 50%, it was 50.1% of people was the turnout for the local elections, which was very poor, and even more poor when you think that was only people who had registered to vote, and it doesn't include those who were never registered to vote or never would register to vote. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we also have some questions coming up in the chat. So Lena is asking if you could elaborate more on how anonymous registration would work.
Yeah, so people have to fill in, for that one, they have to fill in the paper form. They can't do it online. They put in a paper form. They will get their polling card, but it's just kept anonymously. And people can self-declare. They don't need to prove why they want to be anonymous. They can just declare that they are anonymous. And their name will not be given to candidates, and they're just off the system, but will get a polling card.
Then we have another question saying Focus Island worked with other groups such as Black and Irish on the voting registration campaign. How did this intersectional collaboration come about, and how important was it to draw links between socially excluded groups?
It was really, really important for us, and I'm glad it was mentioned. So what we saw was a grassroots campaign. We're doing something similar to ourselves. While they weren't dealing with the homelessness, they were looking at other socially marginalized groups. So I literally just saw that they were running something similar in national voter registration. I reached out to them and asked them, would they like to collaborate and can we support and share our knowledge and information? And they were very open to that, and we supported them on their National Voter Registration Day. They took some of the knowledge we had, we took some of their access to more marginalised groups, and we worked together. We were all at the same aim, improving democracy. So it was brilliant to see new communities like that being involved. And I suppose one of the things that was really important for us as well was a lot of migrants into Ireland did not realise they were able to vote in the local elections. So people who were in direct provision or in our international protection services, they are able to vote once their asylum seeking application hasn't been denied. Even if they're waiting and they're only in the country, they have a right to vote. So it was brilliant to be able to enable this whole group of people who didn't realise they had access to democracy. So it was fabulous to work with other organisations, not just homeless organisations.
Thank you. I don't know if you can, I think you can read the chat because there are a lot of questions coming up and maybe it's easier for you. Most of them are for you. So Marilyn is asking, so would you have a list of countries of particular importance to conduct similar projects? Is there any interest at the EU level to support similar projects? And are you seeking partners to implement or to complete research in this field? I think this can be for both you and Maria, I guess. So
I don't know if I understood the whole question, but I mean, we have covered in our survey. Let me tell you exactly the countries that. So we received answers to our questionnaires from Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Ireland, Italy, Finland, Germany, Greece, and Luxembourg. So we got quite a few inputs from our members, from our board, and I guess the most interesting suggestions for good practices came from Germany, Italy, and Ireland. I think they were, let's say, more advanced in thinking. I'm not saying that the others are not doing anything, but we didn't get that information from them. For example, our Italian member, FIOPS, they conducted its own survey among the member organizations in Italy. So we even have like a percentage of what are the reasons that they report for homeless people participation or non-participation, for example. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but I don't think there's any funding in relation to developing these recommendations or good practices in any other countries. I'm not aware that exists. I'm sorry, I cannot help you with that.
And can I just go back to Ruth's question? Ruth asked a question about what we thought would be the voter block in experiencing homelessness. So what we know is currently there's about 10,000 people adults in emergency accommodation who would be eligible to vote, but that 10,000 doesn't include, there's 55,000 people in the last decade who have gone through homelessness in Ireland. So it's a fluctuating, so that is a significant voting block, that 55,000 people. And also we would say is there are 62,000 people in the HAP, and then another 60,000 on the social housing list. So there's 120,000 households who are at risk of homelessness because they're on social housing lists or in the private rental sector getting social housing help. So that 120,000 households, they are all at risk of homelessness. They're all in fear of homelessness or have experienced homelessness. So those people, we're not just looking for the 10,000 currently in emergency accommodation, we're looking at the 120,000 households on the social housing list who know the fear of being possibly homeless. So we're appealing to those as well.
Okay, at the moment there are no more question, but if you want to still think about it, I will also like to ask you, to the audience, if after this presentation there's something you're thinking to do to make voting rights more accessible, or if you already do something and you would like to share it. So I know Alicia is here in the audience. Maybe she can also tell us a bit about what they're doing in Spain. Let me make you. You should be able to share now your screen.
Okay, thank you very much to FEANSA for giving us the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we are asking political parties to include in their political manifestos. So I'm going to share with you the political measures that we want to ask for the next European elections. So let me share this presentation. Okay, is everybody seeing the?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So from Ugarsi, we have we have developed a series of proposals for the next European elections, and as it has already been said here, next European elections are really important ones because this term lasts till 2029, and as everybody knows, 27 European member states have the commitment to end up to eradicate homelessness by 2030. So if we want to reach this goal, it is necessary to implement effective measures to do so. So I'm going to share, we have like a lot of proposals, so I'm just going to highlight a few of them, but for sure you can visit in our website all the proposals developed. As homelessness is a very complex and multidimensional phenomenon, we have grouped all these measures in various topics regarding housing, healthcare, social services, employment, equality, and governance, because we think that to eradicate homelessness, we have to tackle all these topics, these themes, and it has to be fight by all these areas. So starting with our housing proposals, first we propose the promotion of a community legislation for the regulation and promotion of private and community actors that increase the supply of public housing and affordable rental housing, with a very special focus, of course, on vulnerable groups and homeless individuals. In this sense, we are also proposing that the mobilization of resources and from funds, specifically on the European Development Fund, the Invest EU programs, and also that the European Investment Bank, we ask them to increase the stock of affordable housing. And as well, we ask for the incorporation of incentives in funds allocated to housing rehabilitation when used for affordable rental housing or committed to affordable rental. In general, all these measures, they are directed to increase the stock of housing. So the access to housing is not a problem as it is we are experiencing right now, not just in Spain, but in many European member states. Regarding to healthcare, we suggest to adopt within the framework of the European Patients Forum roadmap to adequately respond to the specific health needs of homeless people, and also to promote actions and measures to make healthcare services more inclusive and develop knowledge about discrimination against homeless people. Because, as you know, many figures show us that people in situation of homelessness have a very difficult access to health, and also people experiencing homelessness have a life expectancy here in Spain 30 years lower than average population. So healthcare, improving the healthcare of people in situation of homelessness is like a very important issue that we have to tackle during this new European mandate. And lastly, also to improve the attention and monitoring of mental health as a way to prevent homelessness and reverse its consequences, of course. regarding to social services, we would like to incorporate people in situation of homelessness into poverty combating actions driven by the European Union within the framework of the SDGs of the 2030 agenda. And also very important to design a European homelessness strategy that promotes the achievement of the objectives set by the EPOCH. We know that a lot of European states or regions or even local municipalities have their homelessness strategies or their different measures and plans, but we think that it should be very, it should be a commitment and a priority to create and design this European homelessness strategy to try to have like a common vision and a common strategy. Also, very important to include the deinstitutionalization of long-term care, incorporating methodologies that promote autonomy and personalized attention, and very linked to this point, to promote tools that facilitate early intervention of homelessness. Different studies and different projects have proved that early intervention, it is the best way to prevent homelessness. So that's the direction that we should follow. And lastly, in terms of youth homelessness, we also encourage to the adoption of the Housing First for Youth approach. And well, lastly, now I'm gonna also mention this last one regarding social services. We also asked to promote the achievement of the Council recommendation proposal on a minimum income for active inclusion. And regarding these three last areas, we would also, regarding employment and social economy, we encourage to promote personalized employment programs within the active employment policies, aim, of course, at vulnerable groups, and also boost market reserve mechanisms and social clauses in public procurement. And of course, to generate a regulatory framework that promotes social impact investment initiatives in the community sphere. In terms of equality, we would like also to address and to include the categories of homelessness and socioeconomic status as prohibited grounds of discrimination in the European legislations against hate crimes, because for the moment they are not included. And regarding to these, very linked, we would also like to ask the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights with producing a report on discrimination due to aporophobia against people in situation of homelessness. As you probably know, this the violence, the discrimination that suffer people in situation of homelessness is growing as well. So we should have like a specific report on this to know to what extent these type of crimes are happening, or well, to study and of course to take measures against these kinds of discrimination. Also, it has to be addressed, the impact of new migration policy measures. For example, like the recent pact that has been passed, the Pact on Migration and Asylum. We have to address the impact that these might have on homelessness. And finally, talking about governance, we would like to, of course, reaffirm the commitment that European states signed with the Lisbon Declaration, but also last year with the Avilés and Gijón declarations, with this commitment to end homelessness by 2030, as I said previously. And also to establish a space for multi-actor technical cooperation with the participation of different levels of administration and civil society, because as I mentioned earlier, homelessness has to be tackled from very different areas: health, social services, economy. So all these areas, all these departments and all the stakeholders involved in this fight have to have the ground, a space to talk and to work to end homelessness. So, and of course, funding is very important for the organizations, for projects to fight against homelessness. That's why homelessness should be a priority issue in all funding calls. I'm just gonna leave it there, but if you're interested, you can visit our website where we have all the proposals developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alicia. And for Louise, we just have another question, just to check if the number of the homeless voting bloc is around 4%, more or less, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, we say that, as I said, if you look at the 120,000 households, that could be, we're not sure how many people that could be. So it's probably higher than 4%.
Thank you. Does anyone have an other question or would like to share something that they are working on? No? So thank you so much for taking part of this webinar. Fianza is also working on our next magazine, which is going to come up soon. And it's going to be on voting rights and on the elections. And we have an article from Louise and other articles on this topic that might be of your interest. This is a series of webinars that we are doing for the next 2 years. So I will also invite you to vote in our survey, because these webinars are demand-led, and you can choose the topic of the upcoming webinars. I will share the link in the chat. Yeah. So you can vote and let us know what you would like for us to talk. Thank you so much for our speakers to be here. And I hope to see you all at the voting polls in 2 weeks. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie.